So everybody's talking about x402, Agentic Payments, and all sorts of stuff like that. So let me just clarify what x402 is. So x402 is an HTTP code. So like you probably heard of HTTP 404, which comes up when a page is not found on the internet, right? The server is down or something, the URL doesn't exist anymore. So that's 404. And there's different types of these status codes that the server can return for a whole host of different reasons. So HTTP 500 will be that the server is down, that there's an error. 403 will mean unauthorized, meaning that you've tried to access some password protected endpoint or something like that, right? And so there's a bunch of these codes, and one of those is HTTP 402, and 402 means payment required. And payment required basically means that you cannot access an endpoint, you can't access a website, a web page, an API endpoint, anything, unless you pay for it, right? So there's a requirement that you have to pay for it before you can access it. And this wasn't ever really actually implemented, right? So nobody was using it as much until recently. So until recently, Coinbase proposed this x402 standard on how we can actually make this useful, how we can actually bring usefulness to this status code. And why now? Well, because crypto has enough adoption now to actually drive these payments. And with the advent of AI and so-called AI agents, which are basically just glorified scripts that run tasks for you and have a feedback loop with an LLM in the background. With these things in tandem, we can now actually make agents, or in fact anything, execute payments on our behalf and prove it to this endpoint that requires the payment. So prove it to this x402 endpoint, and then get this resource, get this web page, get this whatever is hidden behind the endpoint. And so there's been a lot of work on this recently. It's kind of popping off, and I'm really happy to see it, because we're finally bringing real utility to online payments and to kind of not just crypto. There's a new draft version of x402 that will also include fiat payments. So you'll be able to pay for these endpoints with real money. But essentially, it allows this kind of pay-gated internet that doesn't require credit card transactions, that doesn't require complicated wallet processes and so on. So how does it actually work? There are several pieces in this equation that make x402 function. The first part is you need an API that you want to gate, that you want to sell. So essentially anything that you want to provide at a cost. That could be a weather endpoint of some kind. It could be a processing of some kind. So let's imagine that you made a service that makes a screenshot of any URL that you send to it, right? And that's going to cost some resources on your server. The server needs to render that website, it needs to make the screenshot, and it needs to send it back to you. So obviously you would want to make up for this cost. And charging people a monthly subscription for this is kind of silly, especially if it's an on-demand service. You don't know how often people will need this. So this is a great use case for x402. You just x402 gate this one process and then make sure that any kind of script agent or whatever else has this wallet functionality enabled can call this endpoint and basically pay for it on demand. So as the screenshot is requested, that payment is issued and you get your screenshot back. So now, how do we leverage this? How does this happen? How is this used? Well, so let's say that you have locally on your machine or in your browser or something. Let's say that you have a kind of a wallet which has some USDC, right? Some crypto dollars in your wallet, and let's say that these are on the Polygon chain, because Polygon is fast and cheap and most people use it for payments. So now you have this money in there. So how do you pay for this? Well, you actually don't. Your agent or your tool call or your API call does. So what happens in order? in order, you will have a tool that calls, wow, nice. You will have a tool that calls this screenshot endpoint. This screenshot endpoint will return an HTTP 402 status to you that says payment required. This status report will also say how much you have to pay and in which currency, what token, what chain, everything. All the information will be there. Now, the beautiful thing about this is you don't have any complicated wallet procedures like you might have heard of in crypto or experienced, because you can actually make sure that this is all done automatically behind the scenes for you, and you don't even need to have gas costs for this chain that this transaction is happening on. Why? Because of a service called the facilitator. So the facilitator is the second piece of this puzzle. That's a service that runs behind the scenes and basically processes the payments. So how does the payment processing work? So once you get the HTTP 402 response, which tells you how much you have to pay and of what, you will then cryptographically sign a message, which is basically just a block of text, that is essentially what's called a payment authorization. So a payment authorization is similar to what you do when you pay at a kind of credit card POS in a store. You basically use your credit card to sign the authorization for that shop to take money out of your bank account. And here you're doing something similar. You're signing an authorization that the facilitator can take USDC out of your account, out of your wallet, as long as it pays what's due to the service that's requesting this HTTP 402 endpoint that's providing it. So what happens in this situation? In this situation, the facilitator actually takes this signed message from you. And so how do you sign this? Well, that depends on the tool that you're using. There's the AutoPay extension, browser extension that I developed for humans. So humans can use 402 as well. But there's also the variety of wallets and agents running, like LLMs running locally, that can execute this stuff for you, or a variety of different scripts that will actually have other implementations that you might use. But what matters is that it all happens automatically and behind the scenes in the background, so you don't have to worry about it at all. And so what happens is this software that you have, it signs this authorization, it sends it to the facilitator, and this facilitator will then take the money out of your account, pay the service, generate a proof of that payment having been done, and give this proof to that API itself so that it can verify that this payment actually happened. And this is all happening through standardized middleware. So these days it's actually really easy to wrap an existing API into an x402 call. So you can actually monetize your existing APIs already. So once that's verified and the information, the payload, is returned to the client requesting it, then you just get the resource, right? There's no more 402 code because the 402 code is now negated by the receipt of the payment. And so by doing this, you actually get access to a paid endpoint, and it all happens seamlessly behind the scenes. Now, the first steps can be a little bit kind of headachy in terms of onboarding, so you do need to have some sort of software that holds this money for you. This is going to get easier over time, and it's definitely not going to be as much of a nightmare as crypto has been so far, because you don't have any gas costs, you don't have any extension pop-ups bothering you, you don't have any kind of user friction that you might be kind of familiar with from typical crypto use, right? So no more MetaMask headaches, no more, what is this? Nice. No more, no more of these shenanigans where you kind of have to juggle accounts, bridge funds, and so on. So we are working on making this simple. We, by I mean the crypto industry, simpler every day, because we do see a future in this so-called agentic payment sphere where agents are doing all of our transactions online in a way using these x402 endpoints. And so you might be thinking, what could this be useful for? What can we use this x402 for? Well, apart from the scenario I already mentioned, like paying for a paid endpoint, you can actually monetize a whole host of things. Like, let's say that you have a GPU farm. You can actually run inference and pay per inference, pay per model training, pay per optimization through this process. Or imagine this. Imagine one of those, newspaper sites like New York Times and similar. They have typically subscription gates, right? They have to charge you a monthly subscription to read a number of articles or whatever. I don't know how it works. But this way, they can actually gate you per article based on, you can just pay for the article that you want to read. No more, no less. And so they can gate each article in pennies, right? So you can just generally avoid the monthly subscription. This can also apply to API calls. So as you may know, may or may not know, X, or formerly Twitter, they have this really, really, dare I say, rude API pricing tier, right? So $200 per month gets you basic usage, and that is barely usable. It's like very difficult to get any kind of good use out of this, out of the amount of calls that you get for $200. And the next tier is something crazy like $5,000 a month or 3,000. I don't remember. Something too big to even kind of try to explain, try to use. So by buying this kind of subscription, you kind of get some use of it in that moment where you want to use the API. But when you're done, you're still stuck with a lot of unused calls, and you don't actually use all of the APIs that you have access to. You kind of usually have a very specific use case that you want to, a very specific use case that you kind of want to push, right? So what happens is you end up with a lot of unused calls. They end up with something that they're overselling, and so they get less subscribers because they have basically not a very friendly API tier, so fewer people come in and buy it. And you overpay or don't pay at all, so don't become the users. But essentially, you get to kill the API keys and these monthly subscriptions with x402. If you just transition the API, which is, again, very simple, to a pay-per-API call model, you can get a very granular spend, so people can actually pay for whatever they spend, and this results in a much higher utilization of your APIs, much lower costs for everybody, and essentially higher net profit for the API provider. So this is what x402 enables, and this is just scratching the surface. This is just starting. So it's going to be a really exciting time with x402, and I'm extremely bullish on this agentic payment stuff and x402 in general.